Welcome to the Kyle Olson Show. Karl Manke wins again. Gretchen Whitmer and Dana Nessel are apparently waving the white flag in their attempts to take down the 77-year-old Barber. In a story from WLNS this week, Karl Manke, the 77-year-old Owasso barber who received criticism from Governor Whitmer's administration for safely opening his barbershop and cutting hair in protest, had both of his licenses restored by an agency order dismissing the summary suspension orders issued against him. They're giving up. They're letting the 77-year-old barber who has run PR circles around them, they're letting him go. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, Governor Whitmer lashed out at the legislature and citizens who are leading a petition drive to curtail her unilateral executive power. Listen to how she responded.
I want to be very clear. Any attempt to strip away the powers of the governor during this crisis is irresponsible, dangerous, and foolish. We're here today in Phase 4 of the My Safe Start plan, heading towards Phase 5 and leading the country because of the action we took.
How dare we question her authority? How dare you? She is important. She may no longer be in the running to be Joe Biden's running mate, but she is important, and don't you forget it. She'll fade from the national media spotlight. She'll have to turn her sights back onto the unwashed masses here in Michigan. You and me. All the rubes who dare question her authority. You know what's interesting? I don't think it's a coincidence that Dana Nessel said Karl Manke wasn't a hero or a patriot for what he did. And now, if you question Governor Whitmer's authority, it's irresponsible, dangerous, and foolish. Let's play that again.
I want to be very clear. Any attempt to strip away the powers of the governor during this crisis is irresponsible, dangerous, and foolish. We're here today in Phase 4 of the My Safe Start plan, heading towards Phase 5 and leading the country because of the action we took.
So one of the campaigns the left has been waging this election is vote by mail. We've seen it from Nancy Pelosi. She tried to get that in the stimulus bill. We've had our Secretary of State here, Jocelyn Benson, here in Michigan, has been pushing this. You may remember I wrote about a month ago that Whitmer and Nessel and Benson, really sort of the Michigan version of the squad. But Benson decided to send ballot applications unsolicited to all 7.7 million registered voters with using $4.5 million in funds granted by the CARES Act, which was the first federal stimulus bill. Jocelyn Benson told NBC 25, "By mailing applications, we have ensured that no Michigander has to choose between their health and their right to vote." That's nice. Isn't that nice? I think that's nice. State Senator Ruth Johnson, the former Secretary of State who preceded Jocelyn Benson, was a little alarmed by this. Senator Johnson, as Secretary, did a lot of work to clean up voter rolls, and she did what she could to try and eliminate or at least cut down, to the best of her ability, on voter fraud. So her committee, which is the Senate Elections Committee, has been looking into these various things that Secretary Benson has been doing. She found some interesting things. For example, she notes that there are two Michigan Court of Appeals decisions, Taylor versus Curry from 2007 and Fleming versus Macomb County in 2008, which state that election officials do not have the authority to send mass mailings of unsolicited absentee voter applications. In fact, Secretary Benson's own department's elections manual indicates that clerks are not permitted to send unsolicited absentee ballot applications. This document, the Election Officials Manual, Chapter 6, page 2 of 14, from November 2019, which means this is under the Benson administration, under a section titled Maintaining a Permanent Absentee Voter Application List. Quote, clerks may not mail absent voter applications without having received a verbal or written request. Senator Johnson, believes that Secretary Benson may also be violating Michigan law. Michigan Law 168.931A reads, the name of an elected or appointed official of this state or a political subdivision of this state shall not appear on any ballot-related material that is provided to an elector. And yet, that's exactly what happened May 12th, 2020, when Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson sent out unsolicited ballot applications to every voter in the state of Michigan. And in the letter, here's the letter. There are 2 upcoming elections in Michigan this year, a statewide election in August and a national election in November. If you would like to vote by mail in these elections, you can request that your clerk mail your ballot directly to you by completing the enclosed form. After you have signed the form, you can submit it in any one of the following ways. Option 1, scan or take a photo of the form that clearly shows your signature and email it to your clerk at the email address included on the bottom of your absent voter application. Or option 2, mail or drop off the form to your local clerk at the address included on the bottom of your absent voter application. Now, what does that mean? And well, incidentally, she signed it. Her name appears and her signature, which appears to violate Michigan law. Who will hold her accountable for that? But these 2 options, scan or take a photo of the form, how does that work? Richard LeBlanc, who is a Democrat, former state representative, now is Westland City Clerk in Wayne County, posted this on social media. I'd like to reiterate, just for my own satisfaction, how much I do not appreciate the Board of Elections having sent applications to every registered voter, all 63,000 minus the 12,000 permanent absentee voters in my community. My inbox is absolutely flooded with email messages having attachments of photographed applications. Some are sideways. Some have the barcode not showing. Most are legible, but all of them are taking an incredible amount of time to print and respond. The email messages with no verbiage, no message saying, here's my state-sent application, with just an attachment, are not being opened. So I'll get criticized for that later. So what Senator Johnson is now doing is she's asking for requests and examples of evidence of bad applications. And we'll talk more about that in the next segment when I talk with her. But her office says that they've received over 400 emails with examples of bad addresses, dead voters, people who are not legally allowed to vote in the United States are receiving ballot applications. This is an absolute total disaster. So when Secretary Benson was scheduled to present at the recent Senate Elections Committee hearing on June 9th, the day before, she notified the committee that she would only have 30 minutes to appear. Apparently, she took the 30 minutes to give her presentation, and then she would answer, quote, one question, and then she was gone. The Secretary of State doesn't believe she's accountable to the legislature, our elected representatives. Where does all of this end? I hope to get to the bottom of that and what exactly Senator Johnson is doing to defend, protect, ensure the integrity of the vote in Michigan. But it seems to me that that Secretary Benson is just doing whatever she damn well pleases as an activist Secretary of State, and until someone challenges her, that's what she's going to continue to do. So when we come back, I'll have State Senator Ruth Johnson, the former Secretary of State of Michigan. This is the Kyle Olson Show. Thanks for joining us. Joining me now is State Senator Ruth Johnson. Senator Johnson, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me here.
So I just reviewed some of the issues that are going on with Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson's campaign to push vote by mail in the state of Michigan. I know that you've been looking into this too, so tell me about some of the things that you've been finding.
Yeah, well, we already have vote by mail. Really, this is a takeover of the local clerks. We have 1,603 local clerks, which includes 83 county clerks. And we have a system of checks and balances. So the local clerks conduct the elections. The county clerks have at the county for 2 weeks, they canvass, and then it comes up to the state. And I like those kinds of checks and balances. We have local control, which is somewhat unusual in the United States, but it gives people accountability. And if their clerk's not doing a good job, whether it's a council that appoints them or they're elected, they can truly make a change. It's just more accountable to the citizens. What this Secretary of State has done is trying to take away our decentralized system. She's trying, in essence, to get more and more power and to pull it up to county clerks and herself. And part of her plan, and she's implemented, is to send out absentee ballot requests, which is the job of our local clerks. And our local clerks know way more than you can when you have a system with almost 8 million people in it. And they do a great job. They're named some of the best in the country for conducting elections. She's taken that away in part by sending out absentee ballot requests, and she's sent them to people that are dead, lots of people that have moved. There's 2 previous cases that says you cannot send out absentee ballot requests unless somebody requests it. And you can go on a permanent list, you can call your clerk, you can send a letter, you can go online and get it. There's many ways to get it. We've encouraged people, if they would like to do that. But the local clerk is what ensures our integrity. That's been stripped away.
So what is the remedy? Because you just cited those 2 court cases. There's also the Michigan State Law 168.931A, which says that, quote, the name of an elected or appointed official of this state or a political subdivision of this state shall not appear on any ballot-related material that is provided to an elector. But the letter that she sent out clearly had her name, had her signature. So what is the remedy to hold her accountable?
Yeah, and even her own election manual still says, and this is a quote, clerks may not mail absentee voter applications without having received a verbal or written request, which again is easy: phone call, mail, email. Right now, we would like to ask her questions so that we know exactly what's going on, but she has failed and refused to do so by picking a date, changing the date. We accommodated her, and then she limited her time with the committee to less than a half an hour without answering any questions. So I have spoken with the Senate leadership. I believe we need to go further. The last thing I want to do is waste time fighting. We all have an obligation to follow the law, and Michigan has got enough challenges right now with COVID, and our unemployment system is not working at all. We have people that have applied several months ago. They're losing their homes, their cars, and we also have a lot of fraud. The last thing I want to do is waste time in the courts, but I think we're going to be forced to do that soon.
Do you have the ability to compel her to appear before your committee?
I've asked for subpoena power, and I do have the ability to compel answers. We're compiling them, but I don't want something that attorneys sit down and skirt around the answers. Sure. I want the person in front of me. That's how we work in a committee process. And oftentimes, if you ask one question, it generates 3 or 4 more, especially to get to that specificity. So yes, we're getting ready to ask for information. We're putting it together to compel answers, but that's not how this is run. This is, in government, you want the person there that's responsible. You want to be able to ask questions, and you want to be able to then make sure you understand those answers. As you know, many people in politics can run all around that answer and not answer it specifically. And
right.
That's not going to help us. We're running out of time. The clock's ticking. So
what do you think is her motivation for basically going over the heads of the local clerks who should be sending out those ballot applications? What do you think is her motivation for doing that?
I don't know, but I can tell you this: it creates opportunities for fraud, and cheating. I'm very concerned about it. And then the reluctance and manipulation not to answer questions, not to be at committee. We come to Lansing Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from all over the state. I have one senator who comes from well up into the UP. It'd be like driving from here in Michigan to Georgia. And she said, well, she can come Monday. Well, you know, he's here Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, as all of us are, and then we're back in our districts working. So those are kinds of answers that really are to, I believe, to withhold information and not let us really know what's going on. And that's not how government's supposed to work. And I'm going to continue to push for answers. I've asked for subpoena power because of her actions, and I'm hopeful that I'll get it, but I don't know yet. So we're just collecting all the data.
Is it the majority leader that gives you that power?
I've asked to have it looked into, but I believe that it's either that or a vote. I don't know. I had subpoena power as a state representative for the intermediate school district, and the superintendent did end up was incarcerated. I found contracts to family members for $3,800 an hour and trips to Las Vegas, $3,000 to buy something at the front desk, which everything was paid for. So maybe chips, convertible cars, and trips, and all kinds of things, trips down rivers in Europe. Subpoena power is such a powerful tool, and I've used it before, so I feel confident. And because I was the last Secretary of State, did take off 1 out of 6 people, took off over 1 million people off our qualified voter file, of which over 500,000 were dead.
So if someone for the first time is hearing your request for evidence that they're receiving ballot applications for people who are dead, who are non-citizens, who no longer live in those homes, how can they share that information with you?
Yes, because I am chair of elections, I'm collecting these, and so please email them to me at senrjohnson@senate.michigan.gov, and we're all hands on deck. We're getting help to categorize these and try to figure out what list was used. It appears that it's not the list that when I was there that I cleaned off, and even no matter how clean it is, there's plenty of errors because we don't communicate with about half the people in America, whether you've moved to a different state. But nevertheless, I took off 1 out of 6, mostly dead people. That was a pretty easy one to do, and also had a law put in place that must be done. So we're looking at, and we're finding things we never thought we'd find. A 16-year-old that wrote a nice letter that said, I don't think I was supposed to get this. And the last one last night was 2 people in a community that received blank envelopes. And I have a Secretary of State saying, well, this was to clean up the file. There can't be anything further from the truth, because she just started after she heard me say it has something for the Postal Service to return it, but they don't know if somebody died more than a year ago. They keep track for a year, 18 months at the most, and then it's gone. And so they don't question it, they deliver it.
Right. State Senator Ruth Johnson, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, and please send that information to us, and we will do an investigation, and I'll do everything I can to put integrity. We need secure and fair elections. I never did anything that was the least bit partisan when I was Secretary of State, and it's very disheartening to see what's going on now.
Thank you very much. This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Larry Reed is President Emeritus of the Foundation for Economic Education and the Mackinac Center for Public Policy in Midland, which is where I first met him. He's author of the new book, Was Jesus a Socialist?, which I think is a really timely topic when we see everything that's going on social media and the news today. So, Larry, if you read all of those woke theologians on social media, they say Jesus was a socialist. What say you?
Well, thanks, Kyle, for having me. There's nothing in the New Testament that suggests that Jesus was sympathetic in any way to the agenda of socialists today. He never said a word that would suggest he supported the coercive redistribution of wealth. He never talked about government ownership of the means of production, never supported a welfare state, never called for central planning of the economy. All this stuff that socialists promote today has nothing to do with the message of Jesus or the ethics that he taught.
So one thing I don't understand is if you listen to Jim Wallis, for example, he basically believes or asserts that the government should essentially take the place of the church in terms of charity and helping the poor and all of those sorts of things. Is that a biblical concept? I don't understand why people like Jim Wallis would want the government to take the place of the church. What do you think their argument is, and what would Jesus say about that?
No, that is not a biblical concept. It is an abdication of our responsibilities as individual human beings and as Christians in particular. There are many occasions during the New Testament when Jesus encourages charitable giving, taking care of those around you, helping this or that person out, that sort of thing. But never once did he say the way to get that done is through the political process. Not once. In fact, he would say that's hardly an indication of what's really in your heart when you simply sit back and say, politicians should do that. That might make you feel good, but it isn't an indication of what's really going on inside your heart, which is what Jesus was focused on.
So in your writing and in your research, what did you find when it comes to what Jesus said about the government's role or the individual's role, the church's role, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's very consistent and very apparent if you actually read his words throughout the New Testament that he was not a friend of the use of the political process to get your way. He was approached this is in the book of Luke chapter 12, by a man with a redistribution request. The man said to him, "Master, speak to my brother that he divideth the inheritance with me." And Jesus' response was not to say, okay, yeah, we need to step in here and equalize the wealth or get you more. Instead, he rebuked the man for his envy. And he said, man, who made me a judge or divider over you? And one of the most telling parables that he tells is, of course, that of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan is good because he comes upon a man in need and doesn't just blow him off. He doesn't say to the man, well, call your social worker, or there must be a government program for you. Instead, he's a good Samaritan because he took the moment to use his own resources of his own free will to help the man. If he had done any of those other things, we would know him today as the good-for-nothing Samaritan.
So there are a lot of people, and I go back to Jim Wallis. I think he sort of had an elevated status in society during the Obama years. Not so much anymore, but I think he was sort of a good example of the progressive Christian who wanted the government to replace the church in terms of charity and giving and support in society. What's interesting to me about that, though, is that those are the very same people who want separation of church and state, and they don't want the government involved in terms of religion and faith and all of that. But yet they want the government to take the place of churches. What do you think is their real motivation for that?
Well, you've pointed out, Karl, a dramatic irony. I think the real motive is they're more interested in putting the government in charge of other people's lives. They have decided, I don't know Jim Wallis, but my guess is he has probably in his heart decided that he wants the government in charge, and his first priority is achieving that, and somewhere down the line is the priority of actually following what the Bible teaches. He's superimposing his own political ideology, this is my guess, upon what Jesus actually said in the New Testament.
How should Christians respond to all of this? Because I think you're really touching on this debate that's going on between the progressives who want more government control, whether it's in society generally or the church, and conservatives who are saying, no, it's the church's role to be a charity and to support people in need and all of that sort of thing. So how what's your recommendation for Christians as they sort of, wade through these waters?
Well, I always advise Christians to remember that Jesus called upon us to accept the responsibility of caring for those around us that we can help. That's always the most efficient way to get the job done, and it also holds the recipient accountable, whereas usually just sending a government check does not. But I also think that Christians should be more aggressive in responding to those who make this false claim that Jesus was a socialist. And that's the biggest reason why, for example, that I wrote this book. I wanted to give Christians the ammunition, intellectual and scriptural ammunition that they can use to rebut that charge. We shouldn't just roll over and play dead when somebody falsely claims that Jesus would support the socialist agenda.
I think that's exactly right, because I think that there are so many churches in America today that when it comes to political issues, and I'm not saying partisan issues, I'm saying issues, abortion, so many issues that are prevalent in society today, the church doesn't want to take a stand because they don't want to offend anyone. And whether it's because they don't, want to see a drop in tithing or attendance or whatever it may be, the church, generally speaking, I think is very afraid to wade into these situations. And so a book like this, I think, is so timely. But what's your recommendation to church leaders who are nervous about taking a stand and saying, Jesus was not a socialist?
I would recommend that they take another look at 2 Timothy 1:7. Which says that God did not give us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. We're not called to sit back and be shrieking violence as bad people in the world walk over us. We are meant to raise the banner, muster the courage, and speak the truth. Speak truth to power. Whatever the risk. That's what the early followers of Jesus did in such a dramatic way, many of them becoming martyrs for the faith. And we, for the most part, don't face those kinds of threats today, so we have even less excuse not to muster the courage to stand up and address these things. Let the chips fall where they may, but stand for the truth no matter what.
How does your book intersect with what we're seeing on the news today in terms of the rioting and the looting and people demanding rights and all of that sort of thing?
Well, I think there's a direct intersection. I spend some time in the book talking about the parables and the other teachings of Jesus that relate to things like private property, respect for the lives and property of other people. And certainly what we're seeing in the cities these days represents just the opposite in many cases. Now, he was also for justice and for fairness and for compassion. And there's always a role for those important virtues, but there is no excuse for the wanton use of violence against innocent people and their property. And so I think the book in that regard has a lot to teach.
Where can you find Was Jesus a Socialist?
People can get it from Amazon, and they can also get it from Barnes & Noble on their website. They can get it from FEE, the organization I'm with, fee.org, in its bookstore, and maybe other places as well, but certainly those places make it pretty easy to find.
Great. Well, Larry Reed is President Emeritus of the Foundation for Economic Education, and he's author of the new book, Was Jesus a Socialist? Larry, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Karl.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back. Comments that are allowed on those two websites. But let's just take a step back for a second and explain exactly what happened and the significance of that.
So NBC News is one of these mainstream media organizations that apparently likes to try and censor and deplatform its competition. In this case, the Federalist and Zero Hedge, two conservative websites, fairly well known, both of them. And what they did was they worked with this British anti-hate organization. And when you hear the words anti-hate organization, what they really mean is, censorship of conservatives organization. This is called the Centre for Counter and Digital Hate. It's a UK-based group that's linked to George Soros-funded Hope Not Hate and the UK government. It's very much in the same vein as Media Matters or Sleeping Giants here in the US. And they've got a hit list of conservative websites that includes Breitbart News, actually, and they're trying to get advertisers to pull out. They're trying to get big tech companies to censor them. And they more or less succeeded in the case of The Federalist and Zero Hedge. What they did was they got Google to get The Federalist to shut down its comment section because of alleged hate speech violations in the comment section. And Zero Hedge, which refused to shut down its comment section, had Google pull all its ad service from them, which of course is a huge blow to any website because Google has a massive monopoly on digital ads. So when Google comes to you and threatens to take your ads away, as they did after NBC reached out to them, then that could financially cripple a website. So Google has this massive power over every website, over every news website, more power than any other company, I think, has ever had over news organizations. And NBC and these left-wing censorship organizations are trying to use that power to the full to censor conservative voices and conservative news.
And I think this is something that a lot of people don't understand. And we're in the media world, and we're both involved with Breitbart, and which is a target, as you indicated. But there's left-wing media. CNN is another example where Oliver Darcy went after, who's their senior media correspondent at CNN, went after InfoWars and Alex Jones. Now, setting aside any criticism of InfoWars and Alex Jones, you have what this boils down to is a media organization, I think, exploiting social media, etc., in order to try and take out one of their rivals or a platform that they don't like. Is this sort of now with NBC News? Is this sort of becoming a standard tactic in sort of the media battle, or are these just sort of one-off examples?
No, it's absolutely a standard tactic. And it's interesting, all of this emerged after 2016. Google, we published an internal memo from Google a couple of years ago called The Good Censor, and they described how all of Silicon Valley, including Google, including Facebook, including Twitter, shifted towards censorship after 2016. And those are their words, those are Google's words, not mine, shifted towards censorship. And this all happened after 2016, which, a coincidence, what also happened in that year. And right. It was also after then that we saw the emergence of these media reporters. That's when people like Oliver Darcy moved over from conservative media. He used to work for The Blaze. He used to work, I heard a rumor he once even applied to InfoWars. I don't know if that's true or not. But he moved over to CNN. Other media organizations expanded their so-called media reporter departments. And media reporter is the same as anti-hate organization. The function of a media reporter in a mainstream news organization is to monitor right-wing media and look for any excuse to deplatform them. And CNN has this, NBC has this, NBC's they call it the News Verification Unit. So they hunt down so-called fake news, by which they mean conservative media.
Which is isn't that just in and of itself, that is a very cryptic, 1984 sort of thing. Verification center. Verification center,
indeed. And you have to remember, the left invented the word fake news right after the 2016 election. Actually, a week after the 2016 election, that's when it went viral due to a BuzzFeed article. And it was always intended as one of these, flexible words like hate, like conspiracy theory that they used to smear the right. And it was only thanks to President Trump used turning the word fake news around on CNN that it wasn't just completely co-opted by the left and by the mainstream. And this all fits into a wider pattern since 2016. If you see 2016, as many people do, as a revolt by the people against elites, the years since then have been a revolt by the elites against the people. We saw elites in the UK trying to overturn Brexit. They spent years and years trying to do that. And in the US, they've done everything they can to stop the Trump agenda, to censor Donald Trump supporters, to censor the populist media, to censor conservative media. So we're now living in this era of elites revolting against the people, I believe. And the tech censorship is a part of that. The rise of media reporters and verification units is a part of that as well.
So I think the average person who's looking at this could understand the role that NBC News is playing. I'm not, excusing it certainly by any means, but it makes sense. What is the significance of Google being involved in this? What's the significance of that, and what does it mean for press freedom and censorship on online news?
Well, I think never before in human history have so many news organizations been beholden to just a completely unaccountable private actor in the same way that they are today. Two companies, Google and Facebook, have more power than like the wildest dreams of any totalitarian censor. The Soviet Union did not have the kind of power, I think, that Facebook and Google have over news organizations today. Google and Facebook together can cut off all the revenues, your entire audience, if you own a news website. If you're suppressed in Google search and if you're suppressed on Facebook, you don't have an online presence because most people will not go past the first page of Google results. I think it's something like 80-90% of people won't do that. So if you're not on the first page of Google results, then you're effectively not on Google. Equally, Facebook is the world's, by a long margin, the world's most important distributor of news. No other social network, no other website comes close. If you're kicked off Facebook, you're crippled as a news organization. So if you don't have these Silicon Valley giants on your side, if they're against you, or if someone in the NBC News verification unit snitches on you and turns them against you, then you're completely screwed as a news organization.
And I think, Google specifically is now in a position where, because of this ad revenue, as you're explaining, they're able to pick and choose effectively what outlets like the Federalist or Zero Hedge or Breitbart or Daily Caller or Washington Examiner or any of those others, they're able to pick and choose what editorially those websites are able to cover. So, for example, if somebody writes a critical piece of Black Lives Matter or Antifa, and for whatever reason it goes against the standards of Google, well, then they're able to basically shape that editorial. Is that the direction that we're heading? And what should people do about it?
That's absolutely right. And I don't think we're heading in that direction. I think we're already there. Don't be fooled just because you might see a wide variety of sites on Google search or on Facebook that we have a diverse range of opinions or free speech. Because if all of those sites are on there, that means they're following the rules of Facebook and Google. They're likely adjusting their coverage because they know Google's rules, they know Facebook's rules, they know what'll get them suspended. So they're careful not to publish anything that will lead to that happening. So in a sense, Google and Facebook are now the editors in chief of everyone, of every news website, because everyone has to follow their rules or they're essentially booted off the internet. And there's no recourse. If Facebook or Google decides to unfairly kick someone off, then you can't appeal that in court. When people have tried, they've been shut down thanks to the legal immunities enjoyed by these big tech companies that no other industry has.
So we've got just a couple seconds left, but I see all of these tweets from Republican members of Congress who, they rhetorically shake their fist at Google or Twitter or Facebook, and they say, this is censorship and this is not going to stand. But what are they doing about it? And what could the Congress do about it?
Well, the first thing, as I said, is to get rid of those legal immunities. And you shouldn't listen to any Republican or conservative who says that these are free market companies, because you have to remember these companies have special privileges granted to them by Congress in the 1990s under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act that has allowed them to grow this big and this powerful. So they owe their position to the government, to lawmakers. And lawmakers should absolutely get involved and say, well, if you want to keep these immunities, then you have to protect free speech for everyone. And you have to I think they should give people a private right of action to take these companies to court when they unfairly suspend them or unfairly withdraw service. But lots of conservatives, lots of Republicans are completely bought by these companies. They're the biggest lobbying spenders in Washington, and that absolutely includes organizations like the Heritage Foundation, ACU, various Republican lawmakers. There are a few good Republican lawmakers who are not bought off by Google. Hawley, Cruz, Marsha Blackburn, Gomert, and Gosar, Gates. but many others, many conservatives have been bought up by Google. So it's going to be very difficult to see a change in Washington coming soon.
Allum Bokhari is Senior Technology Correspondent at Breitbart News. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Karl.
Thank you so much for listening this week. For more of my work, go to Breitbart.com or find me on Twitter at Kyle Olson and the number 4. This is The Kyle Olson Show.